that we have to recognize that the job which I do, which you do, which anybody listening is doing, will change. And it may change incrementally, it may change quite dramatically. So we have to recognize that we can't just carry on doing things the way we've always done. We have to be prepared to change with that changing landscape.
Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Engati CX. I'm your host, Aish, and today you're in for a treat. We've got digital futurists with us on the show today. So let's begin with a quick introduction of Engati before we talk about our special guest. Engati is the world's leading multilingual no-code chatbot platform, available across 14 channels with 30,000 bots, created across 186 countries in every domain and use case. Engati has also been recognized as a top platform by Inc.com, TechWorld, CIO, and many others. We run the Engati blog, video channel, and the Engati CX podcast, receiving upwards of 300,000 visitors annually. And now for our guest. As a past executive with IBM, Tony is an independent expert, mentor, and consultant, and the advisory board member. He's an international author of 3 books titled Analytics for Insurance, Advanced Analytics and AI, Impact, Implementation, and the Future of Work, and AI and the Future of Banking. He's passionate about international business development, analytics, supply chain, and AI. He's a frequent conference presenter and a chairman, plus an academic, course director, and visiting lecturer. He's also been included in the top 20 global thought leaders on AI. So welcome to the show, Tony. We're thrilled to have you.
Thank you, Aish. Delighted to be here.
Cool. So let's start with our first question. So you start your book by focusing on the meaning of work, which seems to be unusual for a technology book. So what was your thinking behind that approach?
Well, firstly, just to clarify, we'll be talking mainly about my second book, which is about advanced analytics and AI. And it deals really with the impact of AI, how to implement, but also tries to give some indication about what it means for us personally and what organizations will have to do to be ready for it. I started the concept or started the book by focusing on work because work is such an important thing for us. When we describe ourselves, we often describe ourselves as what we are or what we do. We don't talk about ourselves as being a brother or a sister or a father or a mother, but rather perhaps an accountant or an engineer. So our lives are really hinged around the work that we do. So before I got into the issue of the technology and what AI and analytics really mean, I wanted to unpack the meaning of work. Why is it so important for us? What will happen in the future as AI and analytics start to change the way we work? How will we have to prepare for the future? And I really wanted to set the context for the world of work and therefore what AI and analytics mean in that context.
I think AI, technology, all of that, like they have such an impact on how we work and how we can optimize it. But I think there's also a little bit of fear involved. I don't know what are your thoughts on that?
Well, we'll talk a little about that later because some people are worried about the future. Others are very optimistic about the future. There's really 2 schools of thought. Will AI and analytics reduce the amount of work? Will we think of professions being fundamentally changed? Well, of course they will be. But yet, others are looking at the glass being half full. They're thinking in terms of new opportunities, new types of work, new professions even emerging. But I think one of the challenges really is not to drift into that future, but rather to prepare ourselves, even starting today, to get ready for that future and go through that mental leap and get ourselves ready.
For sure. So when you discuss different industries in the book, you divide them into tier 1 industries and tier 2 industries. So can you give us some examples of tier 1 and tier 2 companies and how they adopted advanced analytics, chatbots, and AI?
Well, some people have commented that I've been a little cheeky in segregating industries into tier 1 and tier 2. I think my approach here was that I wanted to identify those industries which were taking the lead in the application of AI and analytics. And those industries typically would be banking, insurance, mainly industries to do with finance, the auto industry, of course, retail. Who can't think about online shopping, Amazon and the like, and of course media. The idea that we now get entertainment on demand. And we see those very much as being the front runners, the tier one industries. But of course, then we have the tier two industries, the second movers. And we think in terms of the agricultural industry, utilities, perhaps education as well. And the challenge really for tier one versus tier two is that you have first mover advantage, where of course you maybe create the landscape for yourself as an organization, or alternatively as tier two, you see what the tier ones have done, and then you implement quickly and more effectively and more efficiently, and therefore the gap between tier one and tier two is ever narrowing. And of course, in a COVID context, of course, we see some of the industries also particularly accelerating. Collaboration, such as the Engati platform, again, is one of the typical tools which is beginning to accelerate in terms of technologies being used. Online shopping, of course, education is changing very rapidly. So, there's quite a mix of tier one, tier two, and accelerated industries that we need to keep an eye on. But for the customer, of course, they view all in the same category. They benchmark a utility company against a banking company. So they don't really see a tier one versus a tier two. And that's kind of what the interesting element is, where professionals move from tier one to tier two and bring their learning, and professionals also move from tier two to tier one and bring a different sort of perspective in terms of the way they work. You asked for some examples. For me, one of the very interesting ones, I think, is a Chinese example, Ping An. And Ping An operate a system called the Good Doctor. And the Good Doctor is effectively a form of advanced analytics / AI capability for rapid diagnosis. Pre-COVID, they had about 250 million customers.
Oh my God, that's a lot of people.
That's a lot of them. Post-COVID, and because of COVID, they've added a further billion. So they are operating AI and advanced analytics at a scale which the Western world really can only look at with a degree of admiration. What are the benefits? Well, they're talking in terms of reducing diagnosis time from 15 minutes to 20 seconds. So that when you look at issues, the global issues such as urbanization and all those broader concepts, seems to be the application of AI and advanced analytics for the benefit of mankind. Elsewhere in the financial services sector, the banks are making quite a lot of progress. Banks such as Wells Fargo talk in terms of the concept of predictive banking, anticipating when you are going to be overdrawn or when a payment will come. And they talk in terms of having maybe 50 different apps to help with that, supplemented by chatbots, all those capabilities. So those are the tier ones. In tier two, we see education coming forward, where you have analytically infused self-learning programs. You also see agriculture, companies such as John Deere, who are using smart analytics to identify yield out in the fields, out on the land, and identify where there is a need for better seeding, better irrigation, better fertilization. So there's a whole lot of things going on, and it's a really, really interesting subject and a really interesting time for change.
Yeah, agriculture is something that shocked me because I don't think I've ever heard of agriculture and AI being something that could, intersect.
Well, once upon a time, if you were the least clever kid in the class, they would say, "Don't worry, we'll kind of put him on the tractor, and get a job on the farm." Nowadays, kind of the pendulum has swung completely over to the other end, where farms are using advanced technology, harvesting, all the things I mentioned earlier, and therefore it's becoming the smartest kid in the classroom who's moving into agriculture. So the world's changing not just from a technology point of view, but just also from a perception point of view.
Oh, definitely. I think digital transformation has really transformed every single industry. A lot of people think it's just only a handful, but I think it's affecting everyone.
Well, in my second book, I actually have a table at the back of the book which has an analysis of all the different professions, or maybe 700 or 800 of them, which identify which professions are most at risk and which are least at risk. And that's kind of based on the degree of education, the manner in which you do the work, for example, the need to negotiate perhaps, the degree of manual labor, which forms a component of that profession. And you actually see a sort of chain effect where you see at the lower end, people who have relatively low skills will be safe from the topic of AI and analytics. Those at the very high end, for example, dentistry perhaps, are also safe. But there's a whole kind of catenary of people in the middle who will be affected to different degrees. So you think in terms then of, as a profession, how do you get ready for the future? Do you sit and wait for the future to come to you? Or do you start preparing now and getting ready for what's really around the corner? I kind of got invited to a group of university professors meeting, and their particular concern was that they were training their students for a manner which was more appropriate to 2005 rather than 2045.
Mm-hmm.
So they're looking at very traditional methods and trying to add on technology and AI, whereupon perhaps they needed to start looking to the other end of the telescope to start understanding really what those professions will look like in the future and how to start preparing their students and future graduates for that future world, really.
Mm-hmm. I think education plays an important role in the process of implementation. I think that's one of the things that kind of starts it off and kind of kicks it off. So what else do you think is the most important element of the process of implementation of these new technologies?
Sure. Well, I think obviously, we mentioned a little earlier about kind of the change in the nature of work and the change in professions, but I see a whole new, the need for a whole new set of competencies emerging. For example, why would we want to learn how to do things which we can do by computer? The old accounting reporting approach, for example. We have to start learning to do things in a different sort of way, how to become more flexible, how to network more effectively, how to negotiate with automatic systems, perhaps. That'd be an interesting one. How will we negotiate with a robot or some sort of computer? There's a whole lot of new competencies and abilities which we have to pick up along the way. And these won't come naturally. We will have to train ourselves for them, or people will earn probably a good living coaching us to become those experts of the future. Mm-hmm. But we have to recognize that there is a shift in the nature of work, which takes me back to why I started with the concept of work. And therefore, as industry changes and professions change, and we as individuals need to change, and therefore we have to start preparing ourselves for that time.
Mm-hmm. I think it's almost like a cultural shift. I don't know if you agree with this or not, but it does feel like it's almost a cultural shift.
Oh, it's definitely a cultural shift, but it's a very exciting shift as well.
Oh, yeah.
You can look at maybe, let's take three particular professions. The Office of Finance, for example. And how will that change? Will the CEO be working with systems almost entirely? The methods of reporting will change automatically. Risk management will change. How will management change as a topic? How will our managers cope, particularly within an environment that they've got no personal experience of? How will they lead their teams? How will they even create their teams? And then, of course, will all this really just open the door to a greater level of entrepreneurship, the ability to do things quickly, try them out, test them. If they work, then improve on them. If they don't work, then drop them. So kind of, the future could everyone being a personal entrepreneur. Who knows?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, honestly, who does know? I remember I read this somewhere, but I saw that a lot of people in terms of finance, and mentioned that so heavily, people are thinking that they're shifting instead of being a FinServ to a FinTech. Like they're saying that it's not about being a financial services institute anymore. It's about being a financial services technical industry. Now that's how the shift is going. So I find that fascinating.
Well, I think new industries will emerge. I think at the moment, what we seem to have are professionals and data scientists working together. I think those two professions, those two businesses, those two sets of capabilities will start converging. So therefore, when we go to university, we won't just learn the pure profession, but we will learn how to apply it in a very advanced technological way. And equally, kind of technologists, it won't be good enough for them to become data scientists. They'll actually have to understand how to apply that to marketing, to sales, to manufacturing. So, the whole game plan is moving. It is that cultural shift, Aish, that you referred to.
Yes, that actually leads me perfectly to my next question, which is almost every profession seems likely to be affected by advanced analytics and AI. So should we as individuals feel safe about our future careers?
Well, do you feel safe?
I feel safe.
That's probably because you see the cup as being half full rather than half empty. I think the reality is that we kind of fall into two camps, don't we? We think either, this is going to be terrible and there's going to be massive job losses, and what will we do? And I'm going to be in a real situation. Or alternatively, we think, the future will bring new opportunities, new ways of working. But, what will work actually mean in the future anyway? Provided that I can pay my bills and can, afford to live where I am and can put money aside for my retirement. Maybe I don't need to work, 80 hours a week. Maybe there's a different way of applying my skills and intelligence and competences. So therefore, of those two camps, which one do you want to fall into? Do you want to fall into the half-empty camp or the half-full camp? And I know which camp I would prefer to be in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it definitely, the mindset plays a huge role to it. And I think we also mentioned this earlier on, but educating. So I think one of those things is like computer science used to be an elective course for universities. I think now it's going to be something that's kind of compulsory because it is something that we kind of need in our day-to-day.
But, by the same measure, you say computer science is compulsory, but, when you learn how to drive a car, they don't necessarily teach you how to repair the engine. So, don't necessarily assume that to undertake a profession such as marketing, you need to understand necessarily the nuts and bolts of analytics under the bonnet, because in fact the computers and the systems will become sufficiently clever that they will interact with you using normal language, maybe even anticipate some of the decisions you would have made normally. So therefore, learning computer languages such as R and the rest may not necessarily be a requirement for being a professional in the future.
Yeah, that's true. But I think you also mentioned another interesting point, which is people. I think work's going to be more optimized because of the use of technology. I think a lot of employees are going to be able to focus on more complex, more satisfying, for lack of a better word, like work that feels more satisfying, not work that feels more menial. I think technology is going to do a great job of taking care of that.
Well, it kind of takes us also back to some really basic psychological principles. Maslow's hierarchy. If you've heard of it, and Maslow talks in terms of enough money to be safe and secure and to pay the bills. And it's only really when we go through that pyramid of needs that we start really getting to the top of that hierarchy, where we start really being adventurous and aspirational. And technology and analytics gives us the opportunity to actually get to that position easier and more comfortably. But it is a mindset, very definitely it's a mindset. Mm-hmm. I think one of the big challenges really, Aisha, is that it's not just about ourselves, but it's also about how organizations change. Because, naturally, COVID is with us at the moment, and many organizations are necessarily thinking about their own future. And, typically you would look at an organization and say that they have some key imperatives, such as, for example, growth and profitability or risk management or customer acquisition or whatever. Maybe just at the moment for many organizations, the key imperative is one of safety and security. Mm-hmm. So they may be looking at their strategy in a different light just at the moment. But for them also, they'll be looking at how to use analytics and AI to achieve those strategic objectives. And the question really is, how do they do it? How do they implement? Because for many people, implementation is the elephant in the corner. Many people say, we want to move to this brave new world of analytics and AI and computers and robots and everything. But actually, it's going to be really hard how to get there. So it requires really good leadership, leadership by people who have no experience of the world that they're leading people into. So therefore, what are the competencies that they will need? So leadership attributes will be changing as much as professional attributes. And then, of course, leaders will have to obtain sponsors within the organization, because at the end of the day, leaders need to be supported by the organization in making those changes. And the leaders will then have to start thinking about how to build their teams. And their teams, of course, if our AI and analytics really becomes popular, the skills which those people need will become in quite short supply. So therefore, it could be quite a valuable profession. So therefore, we think in terms of the implementation, leadership, sponsorship, team building, objectives. Do we change in one big jump, or do we change it incrementally? Is it big bang or incremental? And then in a funny sort of way, we think, well, don't we need to measure what the change is? Because if we can't actually measure what that change is, how can we actually prove to all our stakeholders that we've actually really made a positive change? And in a funny sort of way, although we're talking about advanced analytics and AI, we still need to be back with the basics of descriptive analytics and the simple capability to benchmark one step against another to be able to prove we've actually made a positive change. So can we move from zero to advanced analytics overnight? Well, that's a matter for debate. Others say that we've actually got to go through a maturity curve to actually get there. I think the jury's out on that one.
So you mentioned a lot about how leadership plays a huge role in this. Is this what you mean by personal reinvention? Because I've seen that term pop up while reading about you and your work. I've seen the term personal reinvention pop up quite often. So is that what you mean by that?
Well, it's not just personal reinvention by leaders, but personal reinvention by all of us. That we have to recognize that the job which I do, which you do, which anybody listening is doing, will change. And it may change incrementally, it may change quite dramatically. So we have to recognize that we can't just carry on doing things the way we've always done. We have to be prepared to change with that changing landscape. And really, that's a form of personal reinvention, that we have to think of ourselves as being different people, different professionals to what we were yesterday, because that's what the future will demand. And so actually, to reinvent ourselves requires to understand our strengths, but also our needs in terms of capability and perhaps even weaknesses, and to fill those gaps and move towards them. So personal reinvention isn't threatening by any measure. It's no different from me really moving from being originally an engineer to becoming a data scientist, to becoming an executive, to becoming now an author. Really, those are really just stages of your career, changes of your life, which are as inevitable as the day following night.
So what role does personal reinvention play in the context of AI, in your opinion?
Well, I think it means that we need to anticipate what the future may bring, and we must build personal capabilities to help us be ready for the future. So here's the rub. We can do one or two things. We can either wait for the future to occur and then run and catch up with it, and then kind of jump on that train. Or alternatively, we can start molding the future ourselves. We can actually say, we as professionals understand what the future and what it may look like, what our customers really need, what industry is all about, and start using analytics and AI to help us get to the future. So we can either be victims of what's going on, or we can be contributors. And part of the personal reinvention story is the fact that we learn enough about what's going on to be able to influence what that future looks like. And influencing occurs through things like this, through social media, through blogging, if you're a member of a professional organization, through speaking at those organizations, through networking, through contributing. So the whole issue really, is that We can't allow ourselves as individuals to become victims. We have to start preparing for the future, and that journey starts today, here and now.
Mm-hmm. I really like the ideology of victim versus contributor. I think that's something that's kind of really eye-opening to me. I never thought of it that way. So thank you for sharing that.
Well, the danger really is that, all of us can sit back and we can think that the future of AI and advanced analytics is something which comes out of Hollywood or Bollywood or wherever, where a fictional world kind of creates this concept of Westworld or robots and everything, and that we will all be serfs or slaves in some way to the machine. I don't see it like that. I see humanity and technology sitting side by side. But the challenge really is not to necessarily allow technology to take control, for use of a better expression. We have to remain masters of the technology. I
think hitting that critical balance is going to be key for us to succeed in using it and incorporating it successfully.
But also, you see, that takes me back to my point that if you actually understand what's going on, then you're in a much better place to contribute to the debate. Mm-hmm. So my book, the second one, in fact, the first and the third, really provides some basics for leaders and executives who kind of pretend they know what's going on. But for many of them who are quite senior in their careers, they may have been left behind by some of the jargon, some of the technology. So what I really wanted to do was to provide a bit of a level set, provide them with a little bit of simple jargon, lexicography to help them understand what people are talking about. Because actually, all of us make the mistake often of slipping into our own professional language. Data scientists will drop into technological terms. Accountants will equally drop into their terms. Engineers will drop into their terms. But principally, we're often talking the same thing, but using different languages. Mm-hmm. So what I wanted to do through all three books, and hopefully there'll be a fourth, will be to bring people up to a level of knowledge which enables them to understand and therefore to contribute and therefore to become part of the equation. Because after all, it affects all of us. We all have a stake in the game. We all have a right to be involved in the future. It is our future after all.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think a lot of people like to kind of sprinkle in their own lexicon when explaining things, but I think making it accessible is probably, it's not even probably, it's the key for us to understand and incorporate these more successfully.
But also, of course, when you look at the whole topic of AI and advanced analytics, there's some jargon in there which kind of leaves, the normal guy and woman, it's just out of their league. Of course, because a lot of it is based on very heavy statistical methods, a lot of jargon, a lot of advanced mathematics.
I've been there.
Okay, well, the leader of a business doesn't necessarily need to know that, but he needs to know the components, and he needs to know, more importantly, the impact of what those components bring to the table.
Mm-hmm. So moving to my final question, are there any other thoughts you'd like to leave our audience with?
Well, just to finish off, I can only really repeat what I said earlier, that we are all stakeholders in the future, and we need to behave like stakeholders and not like victims. So how do we do that? Well, we do it by being flexible, agile, we continually learn, we network, and above all, we self-manage ourselves. The future, one which involves AI and advanced analytics, has already started. But have you started to get ready for that future? If not, start immediately. There's no time to lose. Good luck, and thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Tony, for giving us your time. Your insights were really valuable, and I know our audience is going to enjoy this interview. So we'll be back with a new episode with a brand new expert soon. So stay tuned, and we'll see you around for the next one. Bye, everyone.